Okay, so let's take a look at this question here. What is algebra? So for a lot of people, this word algebra is just a terrible word. It probably means nightmare in some language. I'm not sure which language, but a lot of people hate algebra, and you think back, especially adults, they look back and they go, "Oh, that was the worst part of my high school years was taking algebra." It didn't make any sense to them. Not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, and for a lot of people who do take algebra, it's just a bunch of like things you got to memorize and everything else. So, when you're young or when you don't really like it, of course, it's not going to make a lot of sense to you. What I'm going to try to do real quick in a real fast video here is just kind of talk about the real core essence of what algebra is about, and then maybe highlight some kind of key core skills that you're supposed to get out of studying algebra. Okay, so if you're taking an algebra course or going back to school learning this stuff, I think this would be an important video just to put things in context for what you're trying to accomplish when you're studying algebra. All right, so what is algebra? Well, let me kind of start with a basic example of arithmetic. So let's say we had 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? So everyone says, oh yeah, 2 plus 3 equals 5, no problem. And what you're doing, or what we're doing here, is we're adding numbers. Okay, so we add two numbers, we get an answer. Well, if I replace these numbers with just letters, okay, or symbols, I go x plus 3 equals 5. Well, this is an example of arithmetic. I'll just kind of abbreviate here. And this is an example of algebra. Okay, the whole idea of algebra, basically the way I kind of like to think about it, is algebra is essentially doing arithmetic, okay, doing this kind of stuff, 2 plus 3 equals 5. But in algebra, what we do is we use variables, okay? So we use variables like x here to represent a number. And that is kind of the main thing here. So in arithmetic, if you think back to when you were in, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, what were the things that, let's take our example, 2 and 3. Okay, so what could you do with 2 and 3? Well, you can do these number operations with 2 and 3. You can add them, right? So 2 plus 3, we could subtract them, 2 minus 3. Let's see here. You can divide them, 2 divided by 3. And then, of course, we can multiply them, 2 times 3. So now instead of 2 and 3, let's let's have some variables here that represent some number. They're just the placeholders for numbers. Okay, so let's say x and y. All right. Now you're saying, well, okay, now I'm already lost because you're talking about algebra. What's x and y? X and y are simply just any two numbers that you want them to be. Okay, so let's say x could be, I don't know, pick a number. Let's say 10, and y could be 3, okay? Or y could be, let's make it a different number, let's say 7, right? But the beautiful thing about algebra is that these variables, okay, are just, they're kind of like boxes that we can put anything in them, okay, any number we want. Okay, so now we're just talking about a placeholder for a number, but with when we have these letters or these variables, they represent numbers. So if you're thinking about it, well, x and y actually represent some sort of number, so we can still do the same thing with them that we did with these two numbers over here when we studied arithmetic. So we can go, all right, x plus y, we can add those two variables, we could subtract them, okay, we can divide them, okay, and we can multiply them. And in algebra, the notation for multiplication is a little bit different. All we have to do is just write the two letters together just like that. X, that means x times y, okay? So that's just a little kind of minor notation thing in algebra that you learn. But, right here, if I said, okay, z plus g, you're like, oh, z plus g, what does that even mean? Well, just to think about that, that just means one number plus another number. Now, I could write x plus y, or I can write any symbol I'd like. Maybe r plus t, and it still means one number plus another number. Okay, and you can have those numbers represent anything you want them to represent. Okay, so I think the biggest thing that I want you to take away so far in this video is that algebra is nothing but arithmetic. Everything you've done from kindergarten up to probably, like, say, the fifth grade, everything you were doing then, okay, you're going to redo in algebra, but this time instead of using numbers, we're going to start using placeholders for numbers, which are called variables. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other type of things that you learn in algebra. A big, huge thing that we study in algebra are equations, okay? So let's go back to our example here. 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? So if we remember back like in the first grade, you probably did a problem like this. Box plus 3 equals 5. And you'd sit there and your teacher would be like, hey, what plus 3 is going to give you 5 as the answer? And you think about it, scratch your head, and you're like, counting your fingers, you're like, oh yeah, that would be 2. Of course, you'd be super happy, and you get like 5 stars for the day and a lollipop and everything else. and you were rocking, right? Guess what? You were doing algebra, you didn't even realize it, because this box right here is simply a placeholder. Okay, so another way to write that in a little bit more sophisticated manner would be this: x plus 3 equals 5. Okay, that's an algebraic equation. All right, and of course, in algebra, we learn the basic steps to solve equations. And here, we would subtract 3 from both sides of the equation. We would add down, and we would get x equals 2, which would be our solution. But really, we're kind of showing you, when you're learning algebra, we're showing you the procedures to kind of, solve these equations. But it's nothing really more complex than what you were doing in the first grade. I mean, obviously it's more complex, but as far as the basic principles about it, is that we're trying to find a number that balances the equation. So generally in Algebra 1, okay, and in pre-algebra, you're going to learn a couple different types of equations. All right, we learn linear equations. Linear equations are basically things that look like this: 3x minus 4 equals 12, or maybe 6x plus 9 equals x minus 5. These are linear equations, okay? Then you learn things called systems of equations. And it's a little bit more involved. It might look like this: x plus y equals, 7, and 2x minus y equals 9. Okay, this right here, this is a system of equations. Okay, it's a type of equation. Okay, it's not linear, but it's a type of equation, and basically all system is 2 lines that cross. Okay, and we're looking for the intersection point of 2 lines. Okay, and the point that they cross is the solution to a system. Now, this isn't everything about systems. Sometimes systems don't have solutions, i.e. the lines represented by these equations don't cross. But this is the essence of it, okay? And by the way, if you've never taken algebra and you're like a little bit lost, I would take this with a little bit of grain of salt. If you take an algebra, if you're going to be taking it, believe me, these concepts will really come in handy. As far as what this video, the concepts I'm laying out is going to come in handy as far as setting up the big picture expectations of what you're going to learn. Okay, so we're going to be studying a lot of equations in algebra: linear equations, systems of equations. Another type of equations you're going to be studying is something called quadratic equations. All right, and those things look like this: x squared minus maybe 2x minus 6 equals 0. And the idea behind there is that this is a power. Okay, so you have a variable to the second power, okay, when the highest power is 2 in a particular equation. I'm not going to get into, I'm not trying to teach you algebra here in 10 minutes, but this is another type of equation: quadratic equations, linear equations, systems of equations. So we have to try to figure out the answer to these type of things. And then we study things called functions. That's another big thing that we study in algebra. And radical and rational expressions, okay? And you're like, okay, I'm already lost. Radical expressions are nothing more than basically square root type of things. And rational expressions are um, fractions. Basically, they're fractions, but where the numerator and denominator are are have variables in them. So, for example, this is a rational number, 2/3. You would know it as a fraction, but if I go x over z, that becomes a rational expression. So this is basically like an algebraic fraction, if you will. Okay. So this is what we study. We study this a lot in algebra, and then we also study a lot about square roots, like the square root of x, etc. Okay. So I would say a good chunk of I would say maybe like say 70% of what you're studying in algebra 1 is equations. Okay, I would in the balance of what you're going to be studying would fall into the categories of inequalities. I'm probably messing up the spelling because I'm going fast, but that would be things like this: x is less than 3. Okay, so remember x is just some number. So what number is less than 3? Maybe like 2, right? So 2 is less than 3. So 2 would be an answer to this inequality. Okay, so that's a real basic concept of inequalities. And then let's see here, what else would you be studying in algebra? You would also be studying a lot about lines, the graph of lines. Okay, so you have to learn about the XY coordinate plane. Okay, so here's X, here's Y, and what you do in algebra is you first learn about lines and how to graph a line, and then we start learning about the equations that make up a line. Okay, and then we start doing some other things. So basically taking our linear equations and then plotting them on a graph. Okay, but I would say this probably constitutes probably about 90%, 95% of what most people would study in an algebra course. But let me just wrap this up. What is algebra? Listen, really, algebra is taking what you learned, okay, first part of your training in mathematics, okay, which is arithmetic, and then throwing in some variables, okay, throwing in some placeholders, and then you start exploring a lot of new. Once you have variables, now you can start looking at things called equations, and that's really really central. Okay, algebra is a good chunk of it is all about solving equations. But listen, hopefully you enjoyed this video and made some sense to you. I was trying to help you out and give you a good answer to what is algebra, at least not so general where you're like, okay, still get it. Hopefully I did that for you. But listen, please come on over to our site, algebratesthelper.com. It's a totally free resource. Tons of videos, tons of articles, tons of tips, everything. If you're studying algebra, you need to come on over here on a regular basis and get some good, solid free help. So thanks for listening and have a great day.